Today's scripture passage is Mark chapter 14, verses 3 through 9. You can turn there in your Bibles or follow along on the screen. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." This is God's word.
Thanks. You know, one of the things I think it's fun for people to do is to imagine winning the lottery. You know, I don't know if anybody here plays it or not, but you know, it's something that we tend to do. Man, if you won the lottery, what is it, Powerball or something like that? Is that the really big one? I don't know. I really don't pay much attention, but you know, the one with like the $300 million jackpot, whatever it is. And I think most people, when this thing goes through your mind, you think, what would I do if I won that money? What would I do with that? And I think different people come to different conclusions. Some people would want to travel. Some people would want to buy a new house. And not only that, but they would want to buy one for every one of their family members. Other people would want to donate money to some sort of medical research. Other people would want to take money and invest it so that they have something for the future and they don't have to worry. And what it occurs to me, like, you know, you could go on down a list and find all kinds of things that you might want to spend that kind of money on. But each of those things that you might settle on reflects a certain value, something that is important to you. And people, frankly, value different things, as evidenced by the fact that you wouldn't all necessarily agree on how you would want to spend the money. So you value different things. For instance, if you say that you would want to spend the money on travel, that tells me that you're probably a person who values experiences. You long to experience other cultures. You long to see breathtaking beauty in places that you have never been or live, and you want to experience that beauty. Or maybe it's about history. You want to physically be present where certain things happened historically, and you want to feel it by being there. So that's a value on experiencing certain things. But if you say that you would want to use the money to buy a new house, that tells me that your values, you probably like things that look and smell new. Or at least you don't want to have to be fixing stuff that continuously breaks down, right? So those are some things that you might value. If you answered that you would want to use the money for medical research, cancer research, or treatment for Alzheimer's or something, that tells me that you have probably been somewhat affected by something like that over the years, and you know what it feels like to be hurt and to be caused pain by something like that. Therefore, you want to spare other people that experience. And so the value that you hold is seeing if you can eliminate that or alleviate that some way. Or if you want to put the money all in some sort of a savings mechanism for the future, that tells me you probably value security. You don't want to have to wonder anymore where your next meal will come from or where your next mortgage payment will come from. So you value that kind of security. Now, why are we talking about this? Because the passage that we're looking at this morning presents to us what I would call a contrast of values. One person valuing something and another person or other people valuing something completely different. Now, what's interesting is that the passage also puts on display for us some of the conflict that can arise when two people do not share the same values. Now, I will say that the passage that we've read this morning, that Robin read to you, is a beautiful passage. It's one of the more beautiful tableaus that you have presented anywhere in the Scriptures. Now, I'm going to put an artist's rendition of this up on the screen. It's deliberately a little bit not clear. You're meant to sort of have to imagine a little bit. I did brighten it up a little bit so you can sort of picture what the scene might have looked like had you been there. At least this is what this artist pictured. Now keep in mind, at the time this scene transpired, probably not more than 2 weeks have passed since Jesus raised from the dead a certain man whose name was Lazarus. Now that's going to come to figure into our discussion as we move forward. And also keep in mind that Jesus is just a matter of days away from his execution on a cross. So this is when this scene transpires. Now, I will tell you that this scene, which was read for you this morning, is also recorded by 2 other of the gospel writers. So you get this story at 3 different places in the Gospels. And it's also interesting to note that each gospel writer gives you a little bit more detail on how this thing played out. It's like if 3 of you were going to describe something, let's say you were going to describe an accident that you witnessed. You all 3 saw it, but if you're going to tell it to me, you probably would not all include the same details. That's because you are not all paying attention to the same things. And as you tell it, certain things stand out and such. So that's what you have in the gospel accounts of this same event. Now you're going to run into some of those differences as we go through the morning here. So John, in his telling of this event, we read Mark's account. John, in his telling of the event, gives us more detail. Mark is kind of sparse on the details, and it's something we noticed all along as we've been going through Mark, that he's sparse on the details. But John actually tells us that Jesus was at this time spending time with some of his favorite people, some of his dearest friends on earth, and it was just before the deepest turmoil set in. The time of his being betrayed, the time of his being put on trial, the time of his being flogged, the time of his being crucified. All right? So he's spending this time just before that with some of his dear friends. And it happens to transpire in this village outside of Jerusalem that is known as Bethany. And you've seen it before. Bethany, you have. We've encountered it at different points in our study through Mark. Now, you have to keep in mind that Bethany is precisely where Jesus had raised this man Lazarus from the dead after he had been decaying in a tomb for 4 Palestinian days. And Jesus raised him back to life. Now, according to Mark, the one we are reading actually this morning, Jesus is at the home of a man whose name is Simon. And his name is literally fleshed out, Simon the leper. Simon the leper, which that's clearly not his name, but that's how he became known, which tells you something about Simon's life experiences, doesn't it? He's probably one that would want to donate the lottery money he would win to leprosy treatment or cure. Okay, so Simon has dealt with leprosy. Now, this Simon, I will tell you, aside from the 3 Gospels who tell his story, he's never mentioned anywhere else in the Bible. You want to know more about Simon? You're out of luck. This is what you get. So he makes his entrance by hosting this thing where Jesus is sharing a meal with his friends, and then he's gone again. That's all you get about Simon. But if you are daring enough to read between the lines, you will probably realize that Simon is not so much a leper as he is an ex-leper. Think about this. Were Simon still leprous, he would never have been hosting a dinner party. Because lepers didn't do that unless you're doing it in a leper colony for other lepers. But he's got his house filled with people who are not lepers. So that tells you he ain't got leprosy anymore. And how many people in the history of the world can say that? Especially the ancient world, okay? So Lazarus would never have been hosting a dinner party if he'd not been cured of leprosy. He'd never have been allowed to enter society and have social interactions with people who are physically healthy. So we know that something has changed way for the better for Simon. We find him living in Bethany instead of out of town in a leper colony. He's living in the town of Bethany, and he is hosting a dinner party. Now, going back to John's account, who tells us stuff that Mark didn't bother to include, we know that there are at least 14 other people at this dinner party. At least 14 other people, which gives you some idea of the magnitude of where Simon was living. Okay? Have you ever had a dinner party for 14 people in your house? Some of you would have a hard time doing that. Others, you might have plenty of space for that. That's not an easy thing to do. Okay? So Simon's got at least 14 other people. We even know who those 14 are. We know that not only was Simon the ex-leper there, we know Jesus was present. We know Jesus' 12 disciples were present, and that brings us to 14. And we know another man was there, Lazarus. Yes, Lazarus, a guy who just weeks ago was decaying in a tomb. Now, this is a weird thought for me. You ever had dinner with an undead person? Okay, this is weird stuff. Lazarus is there. He is among the living. He's enjoying life. He's eating and he's drinking and he's enjoying the company of his family and his friends. But those 15 are not the only ones that are there. We are also told by Mark in his account that 2 women are there. And they were probably not a part of the social interaction. They were probably invited there to serve. They are fellow villagers in Bethany of Simon the ex-leper. And their names are Mary and Martha, and they happen to be the sisters of who? Lazarus, the man who what? Used to be dead, but isn't anymore. Okay? So we know that they are there too. And if you read between the lines, comparing the different tellings of this event, you realize that those women had probably come to help prepare and serve the dinner guests. And so there are Mary and Martha there at the home of Simon the ex-leper, helping to host what is clearly a dinner party. Now, John, I'm sorry, but just bear with me. I'm going back and forth between 2 different tellings of this to put all the pieces together so you get a full picture. All right? John tells us that this dinner party was actually held in whose honor? In Jesus' honor. It was held in the honor of Jesus. And then you think about it, well, that would be no wonder, would it? Especially when you figure who's hosting and who's doing the serving. You think those folks had a little bit to be thankful for? Simon the ex-leper and Mary and Martha, the sisters of a man who used to be dead but isn't anymore? You think they got a little bit to be thankful for Jesus? So they're hosting a dinner party to say thank you to Jesus. And it just made me think, have you had experiences in your life that would make you do something similar if you had the chance? That would make you want to throw a dinner party in honor of Jesus, which would be a really cool thing to do. And I wondered if you were to throw the party, what would it look like? Would you have a band playing and all excited, energetic, or would it be more solemn? Would you have banners put up on the wall that says, thank you, Jesus? Jesus, you're the best. You're the greatest. We thank you. We love you. Well, I don't know. What would you do? Would you want to have it catered? Or would you want to do the cooking and the serving yourself as a gift of your love? You're all different, and I don't know what it would look like. And you and I can't really do this for Jesus, but I wonder if we could maybe look at our lives as sort of like the opportunity to spend our lives as throwing a dinner party for Jesus. Just kind of an interesting thought that came to me. I don't know. Might be kind of obscure. Okay, but we know this. At some point in the evening, and it wasn't at the beginning, Mary, who's been serving, she does something somewhat unusual. And if you remember the reading, you know what it was. And what she did, believe you me, got everyone's attention. But it did not get everyone's approval. Here's how Mark tells it. Verse 3, he says, while he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came, and John tells us it was Mary, with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Now, what's interesting is that John focuses on the feet of Jesus, but Mark focuses on the head. And Jesus later said that Mary has anointed his body. So this was not just the head or not just the feet. He's getting ointment everywhere. Okay, this is what Mary is doing. Okay. Now I will tell you this: it was not unusual in Jesus' day for an honored guest to have his feet washed when he arrived at such a dinner party. That was customary. It was a customary sign of respect, because you remember, and we've talked about this numerous times, that think of a third world country today, and that's what you have in the biblical era. I mean, you did not have asphalt streets, you did not have concrete sidewalks, you had dirt, and you did not have underground sewers. Okay, so anything that came from the houses laid there in the dust and the dirt. And you had livestock running around just like you do in a third world town now. Livestock running around everywhere doing what livestock do. And people walked everywhere. And they did not have closed shoes like you do. They would have had open-toed sandals. So feet are typically pretty dirty. You know, you can't go anywhere or do anything without your feet getting dirty. So as a customary sign of respect and welcome, hosts would offer to have the guests' feet washed when they arrived. That was typical. This figures prominently into the actions that you see in the Gospels. It happened all the time. Sometimes it was a deliberate slight of Jesus when Jesus points out, when I entered your house, you didn't even wash my feet. Now you know why, okay? Other places you see Jesus getting his feet washed. You see Jesus getting up from a meal and washing his disciples' feet. And they were aghast at it. And I'll tell you why. Because feet were filthy and they stunk, and only the lowest person in that household would get the job of washing the guests' feet. And if the people were wealthy enough to have a servant, it was the servant who was going to be doing the washing. If they couldn't afford a servant, then it was the person of lowest social standing in the family who did it. Get it? That's why the disciples were so aghast when at the Last Supper, Jesus gets up from the meal and he starts doing this. They could not fathom the most important person in their world washing people's stinking feet. So Jesus is here at table, and in the middle of the evening, Mary enters the room, probably taking a break from serving, and she takes this container of very high-priced ointment or perfume, whatever you want to call it. She breaks it open, and she starts dumping it all over Jesus' head and over his feet. We don't know which came first, but the extremes, head to foot. This is what she does. Now, you might ask yourself, what in the world is this ointment? Mark calls it nard, and that is not exactly the most attractive word you've ever let slither through your lips. Nard. That's just a weird sounding word. It's actually short for spikenard, and there's a picture I wanted to show you on the screen. This is a plant from which this stuff, this very expensive ointment, is extracted. That's called spikenard, and spikenard is what comes from the plant. And it's extremely aromatic, and it was grown, and it's still grown today in certain areas of highlands in the Himalayas between Tibet and India, which, if you know anything about geography, you know is a long way from Palestine, especially in the ancient world when you couldn't take a train or a bus or an airplane. And so you know that this is going to be costly. Because when you think about things that are hard to get today, what does that tell you about the price? You know you're going to have to pay through the nose to get it because it's hard to get it. Okay? Well, that's the way it was with things like this. I actually found a comment written in a commentary that I like to read by William Hendrickson. He writes this: in view of the fact that the spikenard or the nard, that had to be procured in a region so remote and carried on camelback through miles and miles of mountain passes, it was very high priced. Now, I also thought it was interesting that Mark, in his telling the story, goes to the trouble of pointing out that this was pure nard, as opposed to that adulterated stuff, as opposed to that stuff that you might get at a little bit lower price. That stuff, like the eau de toilette, right? It's all watered down, as opposed to the real cologne. Okay, you want the cheaper stuff, and so it's kind of mixed with something to make it stretch. Well, Mark points out that this is pure nard. You ask yourself, why does he say that? Because he wants you to kind of do a double take, like, see those cufflinks on that guy? Those are pure gold. That's what Mark is doing for you when he says this is pure nard. Okay, and she's got a large quantity of this. John says it's a pint. What's that? Today, is that 12 ounces, 12 fluid ounces? 15? Okay, 16? Okay, I was just picturing like a can of Diet Coke. Okay, it's even more than that. Now that's a lot of pure perfume. I mean, you don't buy perfume in that kind of a quantity, do you? Doesn't it come in smaller things? I mean, who can afford it if it's really good stuff? So this should tell you some things about Mary and what she has in her possession and what she's willing to do with it. Now, there's something else that we cannot miss. This is contained in a jar made of alabaster. Actually, the Greek text of Mark, he uses the word alabastron. Alabastron. Do we have that? Yeah, there you go. And that stuff was quarried. I guess that's the word for it. Quarried in Egypt. And it was of such a dynamic that you could carve it into these little containers. And these are actually of the era. Okay? So these are the kinds of things that people would have put stuff like that in. And this is what Mary had, filled with pure nard, at least about 16 ounces of it, and what she broke open and lavished upon Jesus. Something that might have looked like that. Now, and this is something else that I've told you before too, but all of this is helpful to understand what's going on in this passage. Okay? People didn't save money in banks because banks didn't exist. How did people save? People who could save, which were very few and far between, they would invest in items of value. Things like precious metals, like gold and silver. They would just buy it and keep it. They would invest in things made of precious stone, stuff like alabaster. They would invest in precious ointments, in oils, things that held value. And this is what they would do for savings. This is what they would do for, it might be the equivalent of your retirement account. You might be the equivalent of your 401k, or your certificate of deposit. Okay, because we're talking about an ancient world, and things didn't happen in that world the way they happen in ours. So this is what you need to be thinking of. This is Mary's sustenance in life. This is how she's providing for herself. She's saving. This is her future. It's at least part of it. And what she does is she takes it and dumps it all over Jesus. Now maybe you're starting to understand why the disciples do what they do. What did they do? They said, "No, what are you doing, you foolish woman? That stuff could have been sold and fed the poor for a year. What are you doing?" See the clash in values? It's a clash in values. Mary takes a huge part of her wealth, her earthly security, and she dumps it, I will call it irrationally, all over Jesus, from head to foot, which is why you see the disciples reacting the way they do. Look at verses 4 and 5. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And read the next sentence for me out loud. Have you ever been rebuked for something? Has anybody ever made you feel stupid for a choice that you made? Okay, how does that feel? Okay, I want you to put yourself in Mary's shoes, because they reamed her out. They rebuked her for doing something so senseless. And I want to know, how did Mary feel? I think you can use your imagination and know. I was asking myself, okay, how do we bring this into today's experience? What would you guess would be the median income of a person who lives in Calvert County today? I can't tell you. I don't know. I do know that 10 years ago, which was the last time I looked at any of this kind of stuff, the median household income of a resident of Calvert County was 89 grand. That wasn't an individual, that was per household. So it might have been two people together making that much. That was 10 years ago. So I'm sure it's significantly higher now. Okay? And what do you make per year? What is your annual income? Paul, no, I'm not asking you to, no. No, I'm not going to do this. Okay? Just think about it. You got the number in your head? Okay, now ask yourself the question. Am I willing to take a year's salary and dump it on someone's feet for 5 minutes of pampering? The answer is no. Would you understand that's what Mary did? Now that is incredible. And you can understand why the disciples said, no! Why would a person do something like that? You would never do it. Or maybe you would. Who in the world would you dump a year's salary on to pamper their feet for 5 minutes? Okay, this is why this story is contained in the New Testament, because it's meant to make us go, wow. When you think of it, you can understand why Judas and the other disciples choked on what Mary did. John makes it clear that it was Judas leading the way and being shocked and being flabbergasted at what Mary had done. And I can see, like you would in the cartoons, dollar signs flashing in front of Judas's eyes. A cartoon is the best way I can think of picturing this. And Judas is thinking, why didn't you sell that stuff, Mary, and just give the money to feed the poor? We also know that John tells us that Judas didn't even care about the poor. He used to take money from the common purse and help himself to it. So that's what Judas really cared about. Now think back to our opening discussion about values. If you won the lottery, what would you choose to do with the money? What you see going on here in this passage is a clash of values. Mary, the sister of Lazarus, is valuing one thing, and Judas and the other 12 are valuing something different, and it's not the same. And sometimes it goes like this. I have done a fair share of marriage counseling over the years of ministry, and I have witnessed a few clashes of differing values. One marriage partner wants to spend money on new living room furniture, and the other one wants it to go in savings. And so what do? They fight. One marriage partner loves to go out for nice dinners at fancy restaurants. The other one is really content with brown bagging it to work and really digs ramen noodles for dinner. And so what do? They fight. These are the kinds of things you work through in premarital counseling. At least you talk about. You can't solve this for people. But you can at least show, look, you're going to have to find a way to deal with these differences because you all don't value the same thing. And if you're going to make a marriage work, you're going to have to get closer to being on the same page at least, or showing respect at least for these different values. Okay? So here you got a major clash of values going on. And every one of you has certain values. And they're not necessarily the same as other people's. Now, what does this passage tell us about Mary? What does it tell you about what Mary values? And there are a couple of things I'm going to show you here. And they're not brain surgery. It's pretty simple, pretty obvious. And one, I will tell you this. Mary's love for Jesus is pretty extravagant. It burns pretty hot. And I couldn't help in my mind but making a connection between what Jesus said when the scribe asked Jesus, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? He said, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I think Mary kind of gets that because she's loving her God with all her heart, soul, mind, and strength. It's kind of cool to see. Mary's love for Jesus is extravagant. To her, and I think, what was it, the MasterCard commercial that always says such and such, priceless, right? Okay. For Mary, Jesus is beyond price. He is priceless. For Mary, Jesus is more valuable than her money, Jesus is more valuable than her nice things that she's got sitting on her shelf. Jesus is more valuable than her financial security for the future. You can see what Mary values here. Now, many people would look at Mary like she's crazy, but money doesn't matter to Mary like it does to other people. Jesus matters to her, and she wants Jesus to feel her love. She wants to do an act that will clearly put it on display so that he can't miss it. And so that's what she does. And some people would look at that and call it over the top. Have you ever been called over the top for what you do for Jesus? Mary was basically said to be over the top, foolish. I ran across a great quote from William Barclay this week on this passage, and it says this, and I want you to tell me if you think this is true, okay? Read the first line silently as I read it out loud, and then I want you to tell me if you think it's true. If love is true, there must always be a certain extravagance in it. Do you think that's true? Now we're going to keep reading and find out why he says that. Love does not nicely calculate the less or the more. It's not concerned to see how little it can decently give. See, how much can I give and get by with it? You know, that's not what love does. No. If love gave all it had, the gift would still be too little. That's the way love behaves. There is a recklessness in love which refuses to count the cost. And I thought, well, that's all nice and true. I wondered if I agreed with it. Okay, I think it's true. So when Mary looks at Jesus, what does she see? Well, I tell you this, no act of self-giving on her part is going to cross her mind as being too extravagant because of the way she loves Jesus. There's no thought in Mary of expense or economy. It's just dump it all over him. And so you can ask yourself the question, so my love for Jesus, have I ever done anything remotely similar in my life? What does it say about my love for Jesus? Those are the kinds of questions I can't help asking myself. So Mary's act of impractical love makes me wonder what it would look similar, what would look similar in my own life. Maybe you can ask yourself, what would a similar love for Jesus look like in your life? Now, Mary's behavior is not only extravagant, we see that Mary's act was very humble. And for this point, I want to draw mainly from John's telling of the story. Okay, so we're leaning away from Mark and focusing on John, where John focuses on what part of Jesus' body? His feet. Because we are told in John that Mary's focusing on Jesus' feet, dumping the stuff on his feet, and then what's she doing with her hair? Do you remember? She starts wiping her feet. She starts wiping Jesus' feet with her hair. Okay, now here we've got to shift back 200 years to a completely different culture. Now I want you to think of Sharia law. I want you to think of head coverings. I want you to think of Muslim women. Why do they do that? Because it is immoral in certain cultures to have one's hair down in mixed company. Only harlots behave that way, which is why you have the head covering. Which is why when you read 1 Corinthians 11, you have the whole discussion about should women come into church and pray with their heads uncovered. It's the same thing. It's the same issue. Now, our culture doesn't think that way, okay? So you got to get out of this culture and into another. Now, here's Mary in mixed company dumping expensive perfume on the feet of a man and letting her hair down in front of a group of men, wiping Jesus' feet with her hair. Now, if that doesn't make you a little bit uncomfortable, you don't get it. Okay? Now, I'm not interpreting anything romantic here. I am just simply saying that Mary is completely free to be who she is in front of her Savior. She doesn't really care that anybody will look askance at her. She's not concerned about that. And I'm not really telling you that you shouldn't care either, because I think there's a certain amount of care about these things that you got to take into consideration, which is why 1 Corinthians 11 was written. Okay? Okay, that was kind of the point. But Mary is free to be intimate here, even though the other people are looking at her like she is nuts. She's gone crazy. And Jesus does not rebuke her for this. Jesus actually sticks up for her. He says, leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing. She has anointed my feet before my burial in preparation. And so I was asking myself this week, does Mary know what's going to happen in just a couple of days? Is she envisioning those feet with a spike driven through them into a wooden pole? Is that why she's pampering those feet? Does she get what nobody else was getting? Or was she just doing something that made sense to her, and Jesus turned it into something prophetic when he says she's preparing me for my burial? Nobody knows, but it's interesting to think about. So her act is humble because no well-to-do woman who's got savings is going to get down there and scrub people's feet. Not in that world. Okay? So she's humble. She's free to be intimate. Now contrast all of this with the ringleader of the negative reaction, whose name is Judas. And I thought, let's just take Judas' story real briefly and look at what we can learn about what Judas cares about from what we know of this incident and some other places in the Gospels. Number one, think about Judas, who calls this action on the part of Mary a wasteful deed. He calls it a waste. What does that tell you about what he does not value? He calls it a waste. We also know that Judas used to pilfer from the group's funds, which is not interest in the common good, which is interest in your own pocket. We know that about Jesus. And we also know that Judas in the next verse beyond what Robin read for us this morning goes out and he betrays Jesus for money. Does anybody remember how much money? 30 pieces of silver. Does somebody want to take a guess as to what that equals in today's currency here in the United States of America? It's about, yes, you're reading the screen. I can see Nathan pointing. It's about $600. For $600, he sells out the life of supposedly a dear friend. By the way, 30 pieces of silver in the Old Testament was the price to redeem a slave. And that was good enough for Jesus. I'm sorry, good enough for Judas. So does it tell you about his values? But I will say this. Charles Spurgeon, the Prince of Preachers, he had something to say about Judas here that I'd never seen before. And this is just the greatest quote. I just love this. I don't really mean to be piling on Judas here. It's easy to pile on Judas, but I just want you to see certain things, okay? In contrast to Mary. Now, Spurgeon says, I shall always feel obliged to Judas for figuring up the price of that box of costly nard. Think about it. You can just picture him out there scribbling in his book. That was worth how much and how many cents? He's got a record. Spurgeon imagines him doing that. He says, Judas did it to blame Mary. But I should never have known what it cost, nor would you either, if Judas hadn't marked it down in his pocketbook and say it was a year's salary. So we gained some benefit from Judas' miserliness here, because we know how much Mary was willing to profitably dump on Jesus. We wouldn't know otherwise. Concluding thoughts. Here we go. Number one, there is no expression of love for Jesus that is too extravagant. Kind of a no-brainer, right? There is no expression of love for Jesus that is too extravagant. Now, love for Jesus will sometimes lead you to do what others might see as extravagant, but Jesus will never scold you for that. He will never scold you. He defended Mary. And a second concluding thought. Giving your all to Jesus may look like foolishness to other people, and it may be criticized severely by those who have a different value. Are you okay with that? Are you prepared for that? Or will you let that stop you? So was Mary's act impulsive? Probably. Was her act prudent? Depends on your perspective, doesn't it? Was her act practical? Most likely not. But Jesus does not rebuke her for being impractical. He doesn't correct her for her prodigality. He doesn't scold her for her lack of thriftiness. What does he do? He celebrates her for what? I would put it this way. Jesus celebrates Mary for the way she treasured him. Even if the act was not sensible. I conclude with what Jesus says then about Mary. I don't know if you caught this when Robin read this for us earlier. Jesus actually issues a prophecy statement in defense of Mary. He says this, "Truly I tell you," and he's talking to the disciples who were busy rebuking Mary. He says, "I tell you truly, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Now think, here we are, 2,000 years later, half a world away, and we're remembering what Mary did. Was Jesus accurate? And wherever his gospel is told throughout the world, this story accompanies it. Jesus was right. Let's pray. Father, thank you for loving us. I realize that when Mary loved extravagantly, she was only completing the circle that you had begun. For you have loved us extravagantly. You have done what other people would call foolish out of love for us. Lord, might we be willing to do the same for you? Give us love for you that is kindred to Mary's. Love that would not even consider expense or cost in doing for you what is fitting. Apply this in my life today. Apply this in the life of each person here today. Might they hear your voice and know the urging of your Spirit. This is our prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.